I'm Jay Elias, General Legal Counsel at Dyer-Lake Funeral Home in North Attleboro. Welcome to this episode of Live and Learn, a series of programs designed to be informative, educational, and upbeat, and always intended to enhance and encourage our personal wellness and awareness. If it wasn't for a radio jingle sung on Christmas Eve in 1926 by a barbershop quartet in Minneapolis, Minnesota, Wheaties cereal probably wouldn't be on the grocery store shelves today. The jingle had a not very catchy name of "Have you tried Wheaties?" But it actually saved the brand and made advertising history by being what's regarded as broadcast radio's first advertising jingle. Introduced in 1924, Wheaties was initially known as Washburn's Gold Medal Whole Wheat Flakes. The name was changed to Wheaties a year later when General Mills acquired the Washburn-Crosby Company. But during its first 2 years, Wheaties cereal failed to catch on with the public. So some members of the General Mills Board of Directors debated about scrapping it and sticking instead with the business of processing grain, as most mills did. Others, though, saw a future in diversifying with a product like Wheaties. The company's vice president stepped in and contacted the manager of the local Minneapolis radio station, suggesting a special radio campaign for Wheaties. The station's publicity man wrote a jingle, and the company enlisted a vocal quartet which every week for 3 years sang the Wheaties jingle live. They did so because practical recording equipment had not yet been invented. But by 1929, sales were still poor and falling, and the General Mills board had pretty much resolved to end its experiment with breakfast cereal when they learned that more than 60% of Wheaties sales were in that Minneapolis-St. Paul area alone, the only place where the "Have you tried Wheaties?" jingle was regularly broadcast. So instead of scrapping the cereal, they instead launched a national campaign, and sales soared. By the way, a few years later, in 1933, advertisers coined what's become one of the most well-known slogans in the country for cereals, and that continues to this day to be the breakfast of champions. In the 1930s, when commercial broadcast radio was enjoying a golden age, there were strict advertising rules in place. Direct advertising during primetime hours was prohibited, so advertisers started using a clever loophole: the jingle, because jingles could mention a company or a product name in an indirect way. For example, the introduction to one radio show called The Adventures of the Jenkins Family began with a short tune called "Oh My, It's Eskimo Pie." What exactly is a jingle? Well, it's been said that a jingle is a marketing tool that's written to be as easy to remember as a nursery rhyme. The shorter, the better. The more repetition, the better. The more rhymes, even better. And it's not just a catchy slogan or phrase that makes for a successful ad jingle. Psychologists and neurologists who study the effects of music on the brain have found that music with a strong emotional connection to the listener is difficult to forget. And that's precisely what jingles do. You're standing in a grocery store aisle and you can't decide on a brand of product to buy. You might unconsciously hear a voice in your head singing a little jingle, and even without thinking about it, you reach for one product over another. It has familiarity, comfort, and association in your memory to something positive. That's what a successful jingle does. It infiltrates your memory. It stays there, often for years, sometimes popping up from out of nowhere when there's a cue to trigger your memory. Advertising jingles in one form or another actually date to the days of William Shakespeare. In 16th century Elizabethan England, roaming bands of musicians would entertain on street corners, hoping to entice a few coins for their audience, or from their audience. Because that wasn't enough to live on, many had to have a sponsor, an advertiser of sorts. Maybe it was the local butcher or baker, someone who could afford to underwrite the musician's expenses. And they might be asked to write a song about their sponsor to be performed as part of that performance. Fast forward to the 1930s and 1940s, and radio shows were often filled with advertising jingles for products of all kinds, short, catchy little ditties that would stay in the listener's mind. And by the 1950s and 60s, jingles had easily made the transition from radio to television. In more recent years, you may have noticed fewer jingles and more songs, both from your earlier years and current ones, playing in the background and even the foreground of both television and radio commercials. Marketing executives have licensed more and more songs from the 60s and up to today's hits that contain earworms. Earworms, those pleasantly melodic, easy to remember hooks that have all the attributes of a typical advertising jingle and tap smack dab right into the nostalgia of your youth. Earworms. The idea is that you can't get them out of your head no matter how hard you try. It's when a song gets stuck in your head, no matter how hard you try to dislodge it. And researchers have found that the shorter and simpler the melody, the more likely it is it's going to get stuck in your head. That's why some of the most common earworms are often advertising jingles or the choruses of pop songs. But what's the connection between advertising and music? Well, there's no question that music is an incredibly powerful and emotive tool. It can make us smile, laugh, or cry. It can bring memories of our childhood flooding back, and it can inspire us to buy certain products when it's combined with the right message. And we're often powerless to the nostalgia of our good old younger days. And when we hear a jingle or a tune that reminds us of those days, well, we're apt to make decisions based on emotion rather than logic. And that's what advertisers love. In a recent Nielsen study that looked at the effectiveness of more than 600 television ads, more than 500 of them included music. The study found that commercials with some form of music perform better than those without, across 4 key metrics: creativity, empathy, emotive power, and information power. In advertising, while memorability naturally matters, effective ads do more than just create memories. Connecting on an emotional level has been shown to lead to a purchase more directly. And the best ads are those that provide both information and emotive power. Popular songs, upbeat jingles seem to be the most effective at invoking an emotional response, while other musical genres seem to be better suited for price and promotional-based ads that strive to get information across to audiences. An effective jingle also triggers something called semantic memories. Those are the memories we've accumulated throughout our lives. Things like facts, ideas, meanings, concepts, whether or not it's who won the Civil War or reading, math, geographical knowledge, like knowing that Washington, D.C. is the capital of the United States. Those are semantic memories. Advertising memories that we retrieve through standard recall and recognition cues are referred to as episodic memories. So, a researcher might ask you if you saw a coffee commercial recently, and you might not think so. But if they ask you if you saw a commercial for coffee while watching, let's say, an episode of Wheel of Fortune last night, there's a far better chance that you'll remember. And if you were told that the ad featured, let's say, a young father waking up, pouring a cup of coffee, and there was a musical jingle playing, the best part of waking up, that memory would be a semantic one, and the chances are greatest that you'd remember it. The way music sounds, the melodies, the rhythms, taglines, the repetitive verses, all of those things play with our expectations and emotions and the associations in our memory, creating a total brain experience that's just perfect for remembering the jingle of a commercial and the product being touted. An effective jingle is short and simple, clear and to the point. It needs to be catchy. Catchy equals memorable. And the more pleasant sounding, the more positive association with the brand. The message and the jingle need to sum up the brand, and it should give the listener a general idea as to what the brand is about. Jingles have slogan lines. Many incorporate them. McDonald's, I'm loving it. Nike's, just do it. Subway's, eat fresh. Few examples of simple yet effective slogan lines. And when those slogan lines are accompanied by music and become the brand's jingle, all the better. Think about it. Have you ever watched a commercial, say, during the Super Bowl, and it was catchy or funny or sentimental or witty, but after an hour, you still might remember the commercial, but you can't remember the product? It happens all the time. That's not an effective ad, and it's not an effective jingle. Long time ago, in the 1940s, when the Chiquita banana jingle hit the airwaves, 1944, its catchy lyrics and tune were one of the great mid-century radio earworms. A sexy Carmen Miranda-style banana with fruit on her head, and the animated movie theater version of the commercial was an even bigger hit. At its peak, that Chiquita banana jingle was one of the most successful jingles of all time, playing over 375 times a day. By the way, in the 1940s, bananas were considered a rare and exotic tropical fruit, and the original Chiquita jingle was written to help teach North Americans how to ripen and use bananas. I'm Chiquita Banana, and I've come to say bananas have to ripen in a certain way. When they're flecked with brown and have a golden hue, bananas taste the best and are best for you. That was part of the Chiquita Banana jingle. Educational and informative and clever. How about plop plop, fizz fizz? Does that ring a bell? In the early 1960s, Alka-Seltzer's bottom line was faltering. The decades-old household reliever of heartburn and acid indigestion was suffering from an image problem. It seems the product had a poor reputation with younger buyers who associated Alka-Seltzer with unattractive overindulgence, and the company needed a new marketing plan and a boost to revitalize sales. Coincidentally, the company was provided with some good news in the form of a physician's conclusion that consumers would get more relief if they took 2 Alka-Seltzer tablets at a time. Until then, the recommended dosage by the manufacturer and stated on its packaging was for a single tablet to be dropped into a glass of water. Plop, fizz. The new information gave way to Alka-Seltzer's unforgettable jingle, plop, plop, fizz, fizz. Oh, what a relief it is. The use of the words plop, plop went far beyond adding to the rhythm of the song. It was clear 2 tablets were being dropped into a glass of water, coinciding with each plop rather than the previous 1 tablet. Well, the TV ad and its jingle completely rewired the way consumers use the product. By driving home the message that using 2 tablets at one time would help achieve the maximum effects, hangover-suffering Americans started using and buying more Alka-Seltzer, twice as much. Hence, plop, plop, fizz, fizz. And although the name Richard Trentledge may not mean anything to you, I'll bet the name Oscar Mayer probably does. Oh, I wish I were an Oscar Mayer wiener. That is what I'd truly like to be. Because if I were an Oscar Mayer wiener, everyone would be in love with me. That jingle had its beginnings in September 1962 when Richard Trentledge, who had worked at several large advertising agencies in the Chicago area, learned that Oscar Mayer, the food giant known for its deli meats and frankfurters, was sponsoring a contest for a wiener jingle. He first heard about it the day before the deadline when the contest was going to end. So he quickly got to work. At home that night, he started to tap out ideas on a typewriter. And inspiration struck when he remembered one of his sons using a term for who was cool, described that person as a dirt bike hot dog. I wish I could be a dirt bike hot dog, his son said, and that inspired Trentledge to type the first line to the jingle, which he completed within an hour. Pairing those lyrics with the soon-to-be famous melody, Trentledge had his son, who was 11, and his daughter, who was 9, record the jingle in the family's low-tech home studio. Both kids had colds when they recorded it, but Trentlich submitted the jingle to Oscar Mayer's headquarters in Wisconsin the very next day, and the company ultimately used the jingle as originally recorded by those two sick kids. They used it in 21 English-speaking countries and continued to do so until 2010, making it one of the longest-running jingles in advertising history. But that Oscar Mayer hot dog jingle was actually eclipsed by another one for the same company, this time for its bologna. If I asked you if your bologna had a name, there's a pretty good chance you'd answer by singing, which I'm not going to. My bologna has a first name, it's O-S-C-A-R. My bologna has a second name, it's M-A-Y-E-R. Well, that jingle was part of a TV commercial first aired in 1973 featuring a 4-year-old boy named Andy Lambros, holding a fishing rod and a sandwich, presumably with Oscar Mayer bologna in it. It went on to become one of the longest-running TV commercials in the country. And in 1971, a songwriter by the name of Barry Manilow wrote a jingle for State Farm Insurance Company, and he called it "Like a Good Neighbor, State Farm is There." And that tune, it's been the lifeblood of State Farm Insurance for decades. It actually wasn't Manilow's only foray into the industry. A young, prolific songwriter in the 60s and 70s, he wrote and recorded dozens of jingles. And when he received an honorary advertising award, he noted that writing advertising jingles was the best music college he could ever imagine, even though he studied music at New York College of Music and Juilliard. He said that what he learned most of all in his jingle days was how to write a catchy melody. And by the way, Manilow was paid $500 for writing that "Like a Good Neighbor" State Farm jingle that would be used for years in different capacities in the company's ad campaigns. If you think he made a fortune off of that, he said that the truth is he hasn't seen another dime from that commercial since the initial $500. While his jingle writing led to a lucrative recording career for him, Manilow made very little money in residuals from any of his still familiar commercial tunes, including another one called "I Am Stuck on Band-Aid" for Band-Aid brand. When Manilow originally wrote the jingle in the 1970s, it was simple and effective. "I am stuck on Band-Aid because Band-Aid's stuck on me." And when you dab a teary eye or blow your nose, there's a good chance you ask for a Kleenex, even if the box being handed to you doesn't bear the Kimberly-Clark Kleenex logo. Same thing when you reach for that small adhesive Band-Aid. It's really an adhesive bandage. And that jiggly, colorful snack you call Jell-O, it's really Jell-O brand gelatin. When you use a brand name as a generic name like Band-Aid, Kleenex, or Jell-O, you're using what's referred to as a generic trademark. There's Velcro, chapstick, dumpster, linoleum, zipper, trampoline, Xerox, all specific brand names that have become part of our descriptive and almost generic language. And courts have long recognized that if a brand name is understood by the public to refer broadly to a descriptive category of something, rather than to a brand's specific product or service, the company may be at risk of losing its trademark. Escalator was once a trademark, cellophane, laundromat, but they all lost their trademark status to what's come to be known as genericide. Some companies have engaged in advertising campaigns to let the public know that their name is actually a trademark, and Band-Aid is one of them, which is why shortly after its release, that Manilow jingle was changed to "I am stuck on Band-Aid brand because Band-Aid brand's stuck on me." Another company, Coca-Cola, they've had a long history of familiar and well-loved slogans and jingles, beginning in 1886 with the very clever and snappy drink Coca-Cola. In 1923, the slogan was "Enjoy Thirst." It may have been a bit too subtle, so the following year it was changed to "Refresh Yourself." And many of us still remember the jingle from the 60s, "Things Go Better with Coke." Or in 1969, it was "It's the Real Thing." Then in 1971, the creative advertising director working on the Coca-Cola ad account, a man by the name of Bill Backer, flying to London to meet up with the musical director on the account to write radio commercials along with two successful British songwriters. The jingle was to be recorded by a popular British singing group at the time called the New Seekers. As fate would have it, heavy fog in London forced Backer's plane to land at an airport in Ireland. Unhappy passengers had to remain near the airport in the event the fog lifted, and more than a few of them were upset and very vocal about their plight. The next day, Backer saw several of the more irate passengers in the airport cafe. Brought together by a common experience, though, many of those passengers were now laughing and sharing stories over snacks, and as fate would have it, over bottles of Coca-Cola. Backer has said that in that moment he saw a bottle of Coke in a whole new light. He saw it as more than a soft drink found in almost every corner of the globe. He saw it as a unifier of sorts, and he began to see the familiar words, "Let's have a Coke," as more than an invitation to pause for refreshment, and instead as a way of saying, "Let's keep each other company for a little while." And that became the basis for the new ad campaign, to see Coke not as it was originally designed to be, as a soft drink, but as a tiny bit of commonality between people, a universally liked formula that would help to keep them company for a few minutes. I'd Like to Buy the World a Coke was released in the United States in July 1971 and immediately struck a responsive chord. The company soon received more than 100,000 letters about the commercial. People were calling the local radio stations begging to hear the commercial. The result was that a record version of that jingle was ultimately created and became "I'd Like to Teach the World to Sing" in perfect harmony. Any chance you remember double your pleasure, double your fun with Doublemint gum? The Wrigley Company introduced its double strength peppermint gum with twice the flavor in 1914. Wrigley's ad department quickly capitalized on the word double by including twins as their spokespeople. Beginning in the 1930s, they had the Doublemint twins, first used drawings of twins to reinforce the notion of double peppermint. And in 1959, they hired twin models to appear in both print ads and commercials, along with that Doublemint jingle. A number of twins played the role up until 2005, which was the last time the company employed Doublemint twins. The number one selling brand of chocolate candy in 2021, Reese's Peanut Butter Cups, followed by M&M's, Snickers, Hershey bars, and topping off the top five, gimme a break, Kit Kat bars. The jingle, gimme a break, break me off a piece of that Kit Kat bar. The origins of the Kit Kat bar date to 1911 when a confectionery company in York, England, named Rowntree's, trademarked the name. And that name dates back to the 18th century when mutton pies were known as Kit Kats because they were served at meetings of a political group called the Kit Kat Club in London, owned by a pastry chef by the name of Christopher Catt. The original version was developed after a worker at Rowntree's factory dropped a recommendation in the suggestion box for a chocolate bar that a man could take to work in his pack-up. It was also originally advertised as the biggest little meal and the perfect companion to a cup of tea. The classic American version of the "Gimme a Break" jingle was in fact written in the late 1980s as something of a advertising throwaway. The advertising company for the candy maker had pretty much landed on a new winning campaign to present to its client. But as is customarily the case, they needed to offer the candy company at least one other option, one that would immediately be tossed aside, thrown away as a less favorable choice, leaving the winning one standing alone, hence a throwaway. For that throwaway slogan, the ad team came up with a somewhat sarcastic slogan of "Give me a break." But by the time they left the meeting and one of the ad execs got down to the first floor of the office building on the elevator, he had the tune and most of the words to the jingle. "Gimme a break, break me off a piece of that Kit Kat bar." And that throwaway jingle, it tested far better than the preordained winning jingle, test audiences loved it. When you think about jingles and ads, you may think McDonald's. So let's fast forward to 2003. Amid a growing global movement of health consciousness and education about nutrition, McDonald's posted the first quarterly loss in its history. It had long symbolized the American way of eating, but it was struggling with an identity crisis for the first time in its history. What hurt the company then was also the perception that in an era of obesity lawsuits and growing health consciousness, it seemed wildly out of touch. And it was said that McDonald's lost its sense of joy. The company needed $1 million idea, so it challenged 14 advertising agencies to pitch a new campaign that would be McDonald's first unified global campaign, intended to connect with people in every culture. So it needed to work in every language with a slogan and a jingle that could be heard and understood around the world. The slogan came first. A German advertising agency came up with, "I'm loving it." At the time, the McDonald's in every country had its own separate marketing and advertising team and agencies. So multiple advertising agencies and music production teams were instructed to stop all their work, because from that point on, for the first time, "I'm loving it" jingle and campaign needed to be incorporated in all their work across the globe, no matter what. And right away, McDonald's knew it had a winner on its hands. So much so that they began working with record executives to launch "I'm Lovin' It" as a standalone pop single, so that listeners would develop a positive association with the song long before they heard it in association with McDonald's. The goal was to plant that earworm before there was even an association with McDonald's. And the first version of the track featured Justin Timberlake, and the hit was phenomenal, but it had no mention of McDonald's. It wasn't until later that year, after the song started to circulate, that McDonald's announced its partnership with Timberlake. And by the way, that $1 million campaign, it's been reported that McDonald's actually spent $1.5 billion on advertising. And although the ad campaign was originally scheduled to run for just 2 years, the jingle has been so successful, it's still being used today. Here's one. If you hear the words "the best part of waking up," there's a good chance you'll say Folgers in your cup. It's a jingle almost every adult American, whether they drink coffee or not, can sing by heart. Folgers has been using the iconic tune in its commercial for 30 years. On September 30th of 2021, though, ownership of all future royalties for that song were auctioned off. The winner, a man named Josh C. He paid $90,500 to come out on top of the auction. The royalty exchange accepted bids on the future royalties from that jingle. The auction started with an opening bid of $63,000, and effective November 2021, Josh C., the auction's winner, took over the ownership of the songwriter's share of public performance royalties, which means he will make money every time it's used in a Folgers commercial, played on TV, in films, on radio, or streamed on the internet. But to put it in perspective, and maybe a bit surprisingly, during 2020, for example, that jingle earned annual royalties of about $12,000. Should Folgers move away from using the jingle, royalties would decrease even more. That's unlikely, though, given the fact that jingle has been so closely linked with Folgers brand since it debuted in 1984. In fact, one such commercial called "Peter Comes Home for Christmas" has aired every year for well over a decade. I'm Jay Elias. Thank you for watching this episode of Live and Learn. I hope you enjoyed it. I look forward to your joining me again for another program designed to enhance and encourage your personal wellness and awareness. Until then, remember, it's never too late to learn. And consider what one of the most well-known advertising executives, David Ogilvy, once famously said of jingles in advertising. If you don't have anything to say, sing it.